who decides which features we get incorporated into the core Bitcoin algorithm as opposed to add-on services like third party or
We all do. Who decides what features get added to the core protocol? We all do. So the Bitcoin consensus algorithm has two powerful constituencies in it. One of the constituencies is miners. The other constituents is users and the merchants who support them. Now there's this misunderstanding that if the miners say this is the feature we want to go for, it happens. Well, not if none of the users follow them, or if a very small number of users follow them. So there are several components to the Bitcoin system, including both Bitcoin software that runs primarily mining and Bitcoin software that runs primarily visual wallets, including lots of wallet services like blockchain info and Coinbase and others. Which means that if you push an upgrade that changes the core protocol, yes, it has to be adopted by all the miners so you can have consensus mining. But it also has to be adopted by all of the online web wallets, otherwise the miners won't have any transactions to mine. And it has to be adopted by all the people writing the applications for wallets for desktops and mobile phones, otherwise the miners won't have any transactions to mine. And then finally, it has to be adopted by the users who have to be persuaded this is a good upgrade. Otherwise, the miners won't have any transactions to mine. We have a lot more power in Bitcoin than in any other decentralized system. So there is a developer team. A lot of people mistakenly think that when you talk about core developers, that this is somehow a title or a group that has been created through some kind of meritocracy. Basically, a core developer is someone who has submitted successfully patches to the core of Bitcoin D. To become a core developer, what you do is you write a patch, and then you submit it. And if it's good, it will get in. And then you're a core developer. Why? Because you develop for the core. And that's really, you won't get a magic ID that you say, hey, core developer, you need to requisition this vehicle. No, none of that. Unfortunately, not as glamorous. It's an open community, open source project. And if we don't like what the core developers are doing, we can fork it. And in fact, it's already been forked a couple of times. There's Bitcoin and Bitcoin J that are now fully functioning Bitcoin alternatives. So if, which still speak to the core Bitcoin protocol and are in lockstep in the development. But if, Gavin Andreessen went mad one day and decided to turn it into FBI coin, he'd find that the Bitcoin and Bitcoin J wouldn't follow him probably, and neither would all the underlying web wallets and none of the miners. And at that point, he's on the minority chain, and that's the loneliest place in the world. All right, let's take another question.
Hi, thanks for this great talk. So you talked about a lot of the good things in Bitcoin. I think there are, however, some negative things that might worry people. I'm thinking here of things like money laundering, which of course, if you want money laundering, you need to go to HSBC, the big bank in London. But that's something that people will raise. But along with that, there's also things like the crypto virus. It seems to me that the problem with extortion is it's very dangerous when you try and get paid because the police will follow the money and so forth. And Bitcoin seems absolutely perfect for things like extortion. I'm waiting for someone to kidnap Warren Buffett and then ransom him for several million Bitcoins. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Several million bits.
Right.
Yeah, crime happens on Bitcoin. Yeah. In fact, it would be really surprising if crime didn't happen on Bitcoin. Because one of the things that's interesting about criminals is that they operate in the highest risk, highest margin businesses that anyone must operate in. And so they tend to use all of the good technology, and they tend to use it first. Criminals were the first to adopt automobiles, the first to adopt telephones, the first to adopt cell phones, the first to adopt Bitcoin. Sure, it's very fungible money. But how many people in this room are criminals? A couple of brave people, a tiny, tiny, tiny minority. So what I look at is system effects. And the system effects of Bitcoin is that it empowers the 99.999% of us so much more than it empowers the 0.001% of criminals. This is exactly the same thing that we've seen on the internet. And at first, the internet was very much a den of thieves, pornographers, terrorists, and weirdos. And since I'm still on it, at least it's still a den of weirdos. But a lot of the other things have been washed out. And they've been washed out into the background because there's a lot more of us than there are criminals. I think it's particularly ironic to get this criticism from the banking system, so I want to point out a couple of things that may be of interest to people because we need some perspective here. In 2007, Wachovia Bank was convicted of money laundering $670 billion to the Sinaloa cartel. They actually pumped 30% of the GDP of Mexico over a period of 10 years into Mexican drug cartels. They are directly responsible for some of the 19,000 people killed during that period. And not a single one of those bastards went to jail. HSBC was convicted last year of money laundering more than $150 billion to cartels, to breaking the sanctions against Iran, Iraq, Syria, Burma, and some of the most horrible governments in the world. Not a single one of them went to jail. Money laundering happens. It happens on the dollar, it happens by the big six banks, and it goes unpunished every single day. On Bitcoin, it's actually easier for law enforcement to make a case, because unless you take extreme OPSEC measures to ensure that you maintain perfect anonymity, which doing over a long period of time is not easy, you will leave a trace. You will have other people you interact with, because money laundering is not a solitary activity. It's a conspiracy activity. And those other people will flip and testify against you and provide addresses that unravel the other addresses that you have. And when you do, the government will be able to make an absolutely bulletproof case against you because they have a distributed asset ledger that proves every transaction you did. So I think in the end, we're going to see all of this balance out. Already, we saw that where Silk Road had a very large amount of activity in the early days, that gradually diminished, and by the time Silk Road shut down, it had a minimal impact on Bitcoin, or the number of transactions, or its price. And I think that really represents what Bitcoin and cryptocurrency stand for today. Money of the people. And the people are mostly good. And we can do good things with it. So, doesn't worry. Thank you.
I can see this replacing cash over time, right? You buy this correct. But my question is that over time, this is a cap on the number of bitcoins that can be generated, and what happens if you reach that cap? Bitcoin to 0 or